The following program is a PodcastOne.com production.
From Hollywood, California, by way of the Broken Skull Ranch, this is the Steve Austin Show.
Give me a hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Now, here's Steve Austin.
The one, the only, the best there is, the best there was, Bret the Hitman Hart. He's going to be here. We're going to talk to him. And this is kind of really an informal conversation because Bret gave me his autobiography many years ago. And you guys have known from my stories here on the Steve Austin Show, I have a hard time reading books. I read one, and now I'm right back with a roadblock in front of me. So I've got to read Bret's book that he personally signed to me. When I read that book, we're going to talk about everything under the sun. And when you're talking to a guy who had the career that Bret Hart had, you can't get it all done in one phone call. You're not going to get it done in 10 phone calls. So I'm hoping Bret has a good time on the show today. He can come back as many times as he wants. I have, the utmost respect for this guy. One of my favorite opponents of all time. One of my favorite guys to watch their body of work of all time. His book, Bret Hart, My Real Life in the Cartoon World of Wrestling, was a bestseller in Canada for 15 weeks, in the UK for 5 weeks, and the USA Top 10 for 14 weeks. Bret's going to join me. I've got to take care of some business. We're going to take care of business right now. When I do come back, the one, the only, Bret the Hitman Hart will speak. All right, gang, I know you've been hearing me talk about all these amazing supplements I've been taking, but here's the deal. If you haven't already, you need to get some for yourself at onnit.com/Steve. When you go to onnit.com/Steve, you not only get the best supplements on earth, you get 10% off. You save money and help keep this show free for everybody. Now, I know what you're thinking. God damn it, Steve, I'm already too smart as it is. I don't need that alpha brain. My body's a physical specimen like a redneck Adonis. I don't need to work out with that shroom tech sport or lift those kettlebells. Well, fine. But if you're over 25, you need to boost your testosterone. So go to onnit.com/Steve. Get 10% off one of the safest, healthiest, and most effective ways to help the body boost testosterone ever created right now by going to onnit.com/Steve and putting some T Plus in your cart. This stuff's going to make you feel like a damn teenager again. Now, you can see how it works at onnit.com/Steve, but you really need to feel what it does. You're going to put on muscle easier. You're going to have more energy and motivation than you can imagine. And anything with 2 legs and a pair of tits you see walking by, and your flagpole's going to be at full salute, and I ain't just whistling Dixie. If it don't happen like that, you can get all your money back, no questions asked, so go to onnit.com/Steve. That's ONNIT.com/Steve. Get your 10% discount off T Plus and your entire order and help support this show. That's ONNIT.com/Steve. Be sure to put in the /Steve to get your discount. Coming back in. I tell you what, everybody, I appreciate my sponsors. This is an edgy show. It takes a real, some guts to jump on the back of this show, but that's what the Steve Austin Show is all about. Without any further ado, the kind of conversation we're having with Bret the Hitman Hart today is very loose platform. Anything, everything under the sun. You guys send questions to SteveAustinShow.com. We're just going to talk randomly about anything and everything that goes on in the world of professional wrestling. If you ever thought about getting into business, this is a damn good show to get some 411. Without any further ado, welcome, Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret, how are you?
I'm doing good. Real good. Life's good.
You're in Calgary right now. What's the temperature?
Oh, it's about 70 out today.
Oh, man, I thought it'd be colder than the sumbitch over there right now.
No, it's nice. It's nice and cool. Actually, these are the best days of the year right now.
Oh, well, I'll be.
Perfect.
So what are you doing? Are you running around? Are you riding your bike or just chilling?
I'm just taking it easy. I did a lot of traveling last week. They had the Bret Hart Appreciation Night here last week in Calgary on Raw, and that was a big day. And then they made it actually Bret Hart Day here in Calgary. And other than that, I've just been taking it easy. I was in Hawaii before that. I got a place down there that I try to spend that kind of May and I don't like May up here. May's the worst month of the year up here. It's like worse than January.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about the Bret Hart Appreciation Day. How was that for you? You go back into the locker room. How long were you actually in WWE? Total time?
Well, I was there 14 straight years.
14 straight years. You go down to WCW. You retire. You've been back, several times since. But you go back in for Bret Hart Appreciation Day. And how's that locker room? How's the field and how's the atmosphere?
I have nothing but respect for all of them. I mean, it's a different kind of group of kids. I call them kids now because I guess that's what they are. And they're so much, they're smaller, they're better athletes, and some of them are just amazing. It's amazing with like some of them, like Daniel Bryan, and Punk, and some of these guys. Some of the stuff that they're doing is like, it just amazes me how they can take it another couple of inches further all the time. There's always somebody taking wrestling another over the boundaries and making it good again. And there's a lot of really good talent out there. I love watching the wrestlers today.
Well, to your point, things kind of keep evolving, just like the game of football has. How often are you able to watch Monday Night Raw these days and stay on top of the current storylines, angles, and everything they've got going?
Here and there, off and on. I mean, I found the last few months I've been watching it pretty close. I try to watch it. When I find that it starts going to too much backstage stuff and too many hokey storylines, I sort of fade off. But usually I go back and check it out again. There's certain guys, especially like second generation guys, like my own nieces and nephews, like Harry and Bulldog's kid and Natalia Neidhart and Kurt Hennig's kid and this guy's kid and Randy Orton. And I know all of them. I knew a lot of them when they were kids. And I kind of always root for the second generation wrestlers, just haven't been one myself, or even the third generation wrestlers. I just think they understand it from a whole different perspective.
It's kind of like obviously they've grown up in the system. Do you feel like gives being second generation gives those kids an advantage?
Oh yeah, it gives them just watching it. I think I don't know that I was ever the greatest student in school. But I think that the real truth of it is I was a student of wrestling. Like when I got out of school, I wasn't paying worry about my math. But when I went to the wrestling matches that night from selling programs when I was a little kid for my dad, after I finished selling all my programs, I could sit right at the timekeeper table, and I'd be watching Lou Thesz wrestling Gene Kiniski, and I'd seen the best in the world right up close and studying it and watching it and going, those guys are good. I knew the good wrestlers from the bad ones. I knew the guys that when guys came across to me as fake or just didn't look very real or didn't look like they took it serious, it came across instantly to me. And I think as a young kid, I understood wrestling. I think when I got into it, and I didn't know how exactly it worked, but I knew I had some ideas on it. Always, I think, as a kid. And when they finally do break you in and tell you that, okay, this is how it works, usually they break you in to referee. It's not such a big shock. You kind of go, okay, I kind of knew anyway. But at the same time, my dad's territory, they took kayfabe so serious that,
Let's stop there. Let's go there, Bret. Kayfabe, you took it serious. These days, it's sports entertainment. Vince McMahon, kind of came out of the closet, so to speak, with the business back in the day before all the exposés. When I grew up, wrestling was real. And although you're second generation, your dad was in the business, it was very protected. What is the biggest difference in your eyes between the kayfabe era versus today's era?
I think it's never the same for the fans. I mean, I think all I ever tried to do is make it as real for the fans as possible. I never liked to go with I never liked to be the one that gave it away. Like when two wrestlers were drinking together after they fought each other and stuff like that. I never wanted to be one of those guys that gave it away where it's like, oh, totally, that's... I always wanted them to guess and think that maybe there was a little tension between me and the one guy that I did have to wrestle, even if he was in the same bar or whatever it is. I always thought when I was a little kid, I wanted to believe it was real. And the best part about being a fan as a kid was when I thought it was real. That was when it was cool. It was really, I wanted to see the fight next week, and I wanted to see, so I grew up with all that sort of, again, I grew up very defensive of wrestling, in my family. It was the family business, and at the same time, I don't know how many fights I had as a kid. I mean, it makes me laugh when I think about how many fights I had as a kid simply over the statement that my dad's tougher than your dad was usually led to a wrestling match on the grass, where usually I put a professional wrestling move on, like a sleeper hold or a Boston Crab, or I remember the Sheik's move was it was the Sheik from Detroit that was using it, the camel clutch or whatever. I don't know how many guys I beat with that. I remember
when you put a kid in a camel clutch on the schoolyard, you mean serious business, brother.
I can remember thinking, you can't do this stuff in amateur wrestling.
Hey, let's talk about when Dr. D, David Schultz, and talking about kayfabe and not kayfabe, and back in when guys protected their business because it was their business. And, everything was predicated on the fact that this was real. When John Stossel went back to do that interview with Dr. D, and Dr. D, I never met the guy, David Schultz, but he was probably a little bit on the aggressive side, and he slapped John Stossel a couple of times and really damaged his ears. But obviously a very unwise move, not a smart thing to do, but he was trying to protect the business in his way. What was your opinions when that was going down?
Well, I think Dave was stressed out at the time, but the real truth of it is that he did take pride in the business, and I think that when that happened with Stossel, his attitude was that I think he did it for the boys and did it for everybody. He thought that everyone would go, who is this punk to be? I thought he was trying to give credibility to, and I agree that it was probably not the smartest thing in the world, but that's how Dave was. Dave had a short fuse, and when he got himself worked up enough, he had a short fuse and could go off on anybody. But in saying that, I always thought Dave was always a good guy to me, and I always felt that you just had to sort of work through that and calm the beast in him sometimes and get him back to his. But he was. In looking back on that, I've seen that clip back so many times, and I have to admit that Stossel did deserve to get slapped. He really had the line by a long shot.
He did. He crossed the line. He had an indignant tone. It was condescending. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to take that approach, the smartest place to do that isn't where he did that. Maybe in a studio there, where he had all his people around. Not that they would have done anything, but I think he picked the wrong person, the wrong place, and the wrong time to conduct that interview.
Right. But I always thought Dave, in looking back over things over the years, I've always thought he was a hero to me for that day. He was always a hero. That was what he did. That for a lot of the boys saluted him on that one.
Hey, man, I don't know how clear I was when I started this show and talking about our conversation. It's just kind of two guys talking about the business, and we're going to filter in some questions that I pulled off my website that people wanted to ask you. But this conversation is just about everything. And like if you and me were riding down the road together, and this is the kind of stuff that we would be talking about, I got to tell you that I've probably never heard enough stories about the dungeon. And I was reading some more articles about you before we talked, and your dad putting you in so many holes down there, and teaching you the business, teaching you respect. What was the atmosphere, the vibe like? Because the stories that were going around was just people screaming and being stretched and punished. What was the dungeon all about?
It was just a little tiny room. Really wasn't that big of a room. It was a little cement room, and then they put some boards around it so you could run into the boards, which are a little softer. They were sort of cushioned boards.
Yeah.
And then but there was no ropes. And there was a mat that was as hard as a floor. There was hardly any give to it at all. In fact, it had boards going all the way across it. There was a little bit of padding, not very good padding, and a canvas, and it was stretched out over the mat. It was actually probably a pretty good amateur wrestling mat, but it was not necessarily a good bump. It had a low ceiling, had two windows where you could kind of peek in, and which were usually broken from baseballs and stuff like that. But then, the things that happened, then there was a whole weight room with everything. My dad mostly hand-built weights, but he did order some special weights that had the heart engraved into the side of the weights and stuff. They had some really nice chrome weights that were sort of new for that time period.
But your dad wasn't down there teaching chain wrestling. He was teaching wrestling holds and respect.
Well, you know what it was he was always, he loved wrestling. He was more of his whole thing was he loved to shoot wrestling. He'd wrestle, he'd go down there and he'd have whatever guys were working up here, they would come up on weekends when business was good in the 50s. All the wrestlers would sort of party at my dad's house, and you'd have a beer and hot dogs and barbecue and stuff like that. And they'd have a big barbecue, and Stu would make beer down in his basement, and they'd all drink beer and wrestle all day down long in the gym. The wrestlers would just kind of shoot with each other, pull necks, they used to call it. I can remember being about 3 or 4 years old and walking around down there with all these huge legs, like weightlifters, usually big, huge, heavy legs.
Yeah.
Guys squatting and stuff like that. Guys like Mike Sharp's dad. I can remember a lot of the guys from those days. But anyway, there's a lot of people up there, wrestling around on the mat. Bulldog Brower was a guy that was around in those days. I remember him. And that's probably about 1960 when I was about 3 years old, when I could probably start remembering them a little bit. And you just be around them. And I just was always comfortable being around wrestlers. They often drove up to my parents' house on like if they got their check on Friday, if they needed it early for something, they'd drive up and get it and pick it up. And my mom was always that was one of the funny things about my dad's house, was that the office was right upstairs. So my mom was always like doing all the work in the office. My dad would be downstairs stretching guys in the basement. And you could hear these bellowing and screaming and these groans coming from the basement all the time for hours. And I'd bring a friend over to the house, and we'd just go upstairs to play pool or something. And you hear all these groans. It was like a haunted house or a torture chamber. And people be looking at you. Now, there was a story about my mom one time that she heard when she wasn't accustomed to Stu stretching guys in the basement, and this must have been before I was born. But she ended up phoning the police because she heard all the screaming and stuff that coming out of the basement. And how the basement came into being what it was in the early 50s. Stu had good connections with the New York territory because he worked there with Toots Mondt and all that. And he was able to get a lot of the champions to come up to work up in Calgary for the Stampede and different things, and bring them up to these big shows. And wrestling started to take off with television in those days. And Stu was one of the first guys to get wrestling on TV. And my dad ran wrestling like you dream it. It was like this great dream for all these wrestlers. And, they're all guys that he hired, and they were running around the country. And wrestling was super popular, and wrestling became popular. And they bought an airplane. The guys that used to work my dad's territory in the 50s used to fly to the towns. It was like a whole different world. And, by the time I was born, wrestling changed, and wrestling had lost some of its glamour. It was kind of getting kind of old. There was baseball and all kinds of stuff on TV now. And, but when my dad would get calls from guys, they'd, someone like Vern Gagne would call up, and he goes, I got this guy that's he's a football player, but I don't know if he's got what it takes, so I'm going to send him up to Stu.
But was it just the football players for Stu to stretch, or was it accomplished guys coming in there to learn some more stuff to put in their arsenal? Because I'm thinking it's purely submission holds, and how much of that, are they going to actually use in the squared circle? Well,
like I said, a lot of times they just bowled around. He was like
right.
Everybody took on everybody, and he had about 10 guys up there learning. There'd be a couple that are football players, and there'd be a couple that are, that are not, they're just big farm kids, or he would generally look for guys that, and got reference. Like the guys that ended up here were guys that somebody had said, hey, check out Stu Hart in Calgary. He'll teach you how to be a wrestler.
What kind of come-to-Jesus meeting was it for these football players who think they're all that in a bag of chips? And I got a lot of respect for football players, but, mister, when you take that knowledge and put it in there with a shooter, and you're in that world, tough day at the office. How'd the football players make out?
Well, a lot of guys, if you look back on those days, like Wilbur Snyder and Gene Kiniski and Ernie Ladd, and there's quite a few guys that were football players that got into wrestling and did quite well. I think it's easy to, they're comparable to each other. It's a good big man sport, wrestling is, for someone that gets, especially if you you had to leave football because of an injury or whatever, you still got the basics. Wrestling's a perfect thing for somebody because it's a lot of the same movement as a football player. Same kind of running, the same kind of physical contact.
What kind of
pro wrestling.
What kind of stuff was your dad telling you? Like if he had you in a submission hold and he was stretching you, what was he telling you while he was doing that?
Well, there's a lot of people like to describe my dad as a guy that just always tortured guys, but the reality and the honest truth of it is that he never was like that at all. And he was generally a guy that he was so passionate about it. He really loved teaching anybody that would just want to learn. You could stop him anywhere, on a bus, anywhere, or an airplane, as long as you wanted to know how it worked for real, he would love to show you.
Do you think
he loved a good student? If someone that he started to show you how to, bend somebody and bend them up into a pretzel, and he's giving you sort of the fine points and how to get the guy's arm to sweep across this way or whatever. All these little fine-tuning little tricks that he used to have. If you took an interest in it, you could talk. He'd talk you till your ear was off. He'd talk you for days about it until he was like that was what he loved to do. That's what he really loved to do more than anything in the world, was teach you submission wrestling. Anyone that was interested, especially big men. He loved to make a big, tough guy even tougher and maybe even more, he wanted to make you that much more invincible.
But obviously that had a lot to do with your work style in the ring. I was obviously I've had 100 matches with you, and they all were what they were. And we went out there, and the thing about when you and I worked with each other was total respect, total trust, and both guys going out there and having a damn good match, for that crowd. But in looking at your work, and I was last night on YouTube, I watched, I guess it was you and Ricky Steamboat from 1986. It might have been at the Boston Garden. It was, that was a hellacious match. And just the work itself, and going back to some of your earlier matches in Calgary with you and Dynamite, when you guys are still youngsters, but just the work itself, the tightness, the snugness, and you guys weren't potatoing each other. I'm just talking about good, solid work. If you're on the internet looking for some good wrestling, just look up Bret versus Steamboat in about 86. Look up anything with Bret and Dynamite, or anything with Bret in general. But these are some of the matches I watched last night. And when I watch you in the ring, you can watch that today, tomorrow, 20 years from now. That is reality. That is what professional wrestling is supposed to be.
Yeah, I took a lot of pride in all my matches. I've had a lot of people tell me that they can't find a bad match, even though I do know there are a few of them out there. But most of my matches, I always, whether the camera was on or whether the camera was off, I always gave a hard match. I never cut corners, and I was always a guy that wanted to leave it all in the field every night. That was the way my dad, that's the way he ran his wrestling, and that's the way as a fan I watched wrestling. And, I enjoyed, being Bret the Hitman Hart. It was a good, I just grew into that persona or that character. And
well, who was Bret the Hitman Hart? The character or the personality in the ring? Who and what was Bret the Hitman? What was that all about?
A whole bunch of different things and I think it's the same for you. You sort of transform over a period of time. You become this thing. But you put so much invest so much of your own magic into this thing that you create, and it's the television and everything else, and the look that you have at a certain time, and it's like you peak at a certain time. And I look back on my time when I peaked. I didn't peak in 1984 and Hogan days and Warrior, and a lot of ways I kind of floated around the mid card, and I had the tag belts and stuff. But I was never, in a lot of ways I kind of kept missing the train, or kept thinking I was. But in reality, I was, when I did get my break, I was still, I had paid a lot of dues, but still, I think the timing was perfect. I really was. I think I felt in '92, and maybe you would be a good person to sort of talk about all this. But I mean, I think if you look at wrestling today, and you see the way they wrestle today, the way the whole show works, the way the sort of bending the reality and the backstage and making it a live sort of soap opera and all of that has all come from Raw in the days of my generation. But I think that if you really watch wrestling today and you're a fan of it, or at least you still love a good wrestling match, depending on who's working. I think you'll find that most of the wrestlers today they didn't get their wrestling skills watching a lot of the guys before me. And I'm not trying to put anyone down, but sort of the muscle man era and the bodybuilder era, like the Warrior, Hogan, the days of wrestling being one tackle, drop down, get it again, like the slow guys that weren't creating. When I got into the business, there was a lot of guys that had stopped creating, and wrestling was becoming a routine. Everybody had a routine, and that's all you did. You just stayed in the routine. And I think when Dynamite came along in Calgary, we changed that up a lot. It became like no more routines. We're going to just ad lib and do stuff, and we're going to. And I think I brought a lot of, and I think Dynamite also did, but the Hart to the Stampede guys brought a lot of that to WWE when we came there. We started making everyone pick up the pace a little bit. Wrestling was supposed to be bang, bang, bang. And
yeah, but you guys, what I noticed when I was watching, I watched about 3 matches with you and Dynamite last night. You guys had a hell of a pace going. But
yeah,
between the bumps, between the holds, stuff in transition. I mean, once you knocked the guy down, whether it was you or Dynamite, and both of you guys were selling your asses off. I mean, it was Picasso and Rembrandt on the salesman aspect of that match, and great offensive moves. But you guys weren't rushing through the process. You were taking your time. And I want to talk a little bit more about your rivalry, your matches in the early days of Calgary with Dynamite. And I want to talk more about your early matches in Calgary, the Stampede Wrestling with Dynamite when we come back from this break. We're talking with Bret Hart. I'll be right back.
Hey, it's Adam Carolla from the Adam Carolla Show. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch and bet on games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball as well. BetOnline has NHL, MMA, and championship boxing, all your betting needs in one place. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. So have some fun. Make these games and these events and these combat sports a little more interesting with BetOnline. BetOnline. The game starts here.
Welcome to the Steve Austin Show.
Said you wanted the best, I got the best. I'm talking with Bret the Hitman Hart today. Just an off-the-cuff conversation between two cats who come from the world of pro wrestling. And yeah, I know it's sports entertainment today, but when you're talking about Steve Austin and Bret the Hitman Hart talking, it's pro wrestling. When we left off, we were talking about Dynamite Kid. We were talking about your matches in the ring, how you guys had a quick work rate, but were taking your time and telling the stories. I've always wanted to know a little bit more about Dynamite. Unfortunately, I was never able to meet him while he was still in the ring. What kind of guy was he?
He was, I think, the guy that changed wrestling to where it is right now. He deserves the most credit of anybody I can think of. Maybe me, and maybe in some other ways I'm behind him in that. But he really changed wrestling, and he was so fast-paced, and he learned his wrestling psychology or wrestling style in England, which was rooted in actually shoot kind of wrestling with a lot of silly kind of wrestling at the same time, like flips and rolls and tumbling and sort of funny type of wrestling that people, a lot of Americans laughed at wrestlers that worked like that. But there was some guys that, you know, even Fit Finlay and guys like that before that were, you know, real good wrestlers and legit wrestlers that were in the business. And so in England, you could go to one show and it'd be a lot of, you know, not very good workers, say, and you might go to another show 10 miles up the road, and it's full of like really hard workers and old shooters and guys putting on great matches. And England had its share of great workers, and Dynamite learned a lot of that. And when he came to Calgary and you know, Stampede wrestling, he was always unfortunately a guy that had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Though he had a small man complex. He was a small guy.
How tall was Dynamite straight up?
He was about 5'8".
Okay.
5'8", which made him not very tall, but not so short. You know, like he
was a guy just walking.
I mean, I saw him. He was like a pit bull. He was a real pit bull of wrestling. And
but was he just a mean-spirited guy?
He was. You know, he was a good guy. He was like a mean little pit bull.
Right.
You know, if you made friends with him and you got to know him, he was the friendliest little pit bull in the world. But if you crossed him, he'd bite your head off. You know, he was afraid of no man. I mean, when I say that, I mean nobody. He was one of those kind of guys that would go nose to nose with the biggest guy in the company over anything, over the smallest thing, and usually just establish that you know who he was. He seemed to always want to be the toughest guy in the room, and generally was accorded that respect all the time, because a lot of times, pretty much no matter what, despite his size, he was the toughest guy in the room. He was a tough, really tough little guy. When
I watched you guys in the ring from your earlier matches back in the day, you guys were just seemingly so on the same page and had such chemistry. Was it like that the first time you locked up? Was it something that was acquired? Because just watching you two work together, there's from you know, and I coming from myself, there's seemingly almost no communication going on in that ring, and you guys are just telling the story and, you know, beating the living dog shit out of each other and having kick-ass matches.
Well, you know, the truth about me and Dynamite is that I saw him, I worked with him the very first, I had actually had, I had my first wrestling match, I think, the week before, and then they asked me to go again, and I said, I didn't want to go. I said, I'm just learning how to wrestle. I was going to Puerto Rico, and but they sent me around on the road trip because they were short one guy, and somebody else was wrestling Dynamite, and they promised me a real easy match with sort of an old veteran guy that was going to, you know, lead me through the moves and kind of make sure I looked okay, and so I had it all planned. I had the whole match set up, and it was really easy, or at least for me, it was hard. But something happened, and the guy wouldn't work with Dynamite, and they switched it, and they told me that I had to wrestle him. I said, I can't wrestle an English guy. I can barely, I know how to take a few bumps and stuff, but I don't know how to wrestle. I just started. I had my first match last week. Yeah. Give me a break. Like, I can't do a bunch of flips and rolls. I'd already seen Dynamite stuff.
Right.
And they made me wrestle Dynamite. And Dynamite sitting in the dressing room watching me sort of make this big thing. And I remember I kept telling him, it's not that I don't want to wrestle you, it's just that I don't know how to wrestle you. But he took offense to all that. And he broke me in Dynamite style. We worked for most of the match, but every now and then he just kicked me in the face as hard as he could, or he just suplexed me over the top rope, like right onto the floor, or like, it was just.
Dude, was that a shoot?
Huh?
Was that a shoot?
Yeah, that was a shoot.
That's
the
one.
Hurt you.
Yeah, that's on YouTube. That suplex over the top rope is one of the most brutal things I've ever seen in my life. It was phenomenal. It was spectacular if you're on the watching end of it. If you're on the receiving end of it, not so much.
Well, and sad, I say this with all great sadness, is that same bump that we did perfectly that day on that show and didn't hurt ourselves is the same one that he did with Dynamite, or he did with Davey years later for a finish in Japan when they finally had to wrestle each other, so it was a big match. And Dynamite let Davey suplex him over the top, and Dynamite hurt his back on the ring apron, and that's the back injury that sort of ruined his life.
Was that the back injury? Because I thought it was in a tag match where seemingly he kind of almost tripped coming off the rope.
You heard it wrestling Morocco and Orton somewhere in Hamilton.
But that was the match that kind of broke the
match that really did it when he first.
Right.
They came back. They carried him back to the dressing room. They put him on ice They put ice on his pack for about an hour or 30 minutes because he had to wait for his last. He wrestled again. He went in and wrestled. That was a Tiger Mask, but he wrestled another mask guy and won the title that week, or with that time in Japan. But I mean, I just know that he always had problems with his back. Lower back was always sort of just twinging on him all the time, right till it finally just, it just went. That a few years later.
I'd love to talk with that guy a little bit. I've seen some stuff on him. I guess he's in a wheelchair over there. But like you said, I mean, that guy really paved a way for a lot of guys to follow and was stylistically just a trendsetter from the innovation standpoint.
The other thing about Dynamite that I loved about him, and I think people some people don't, they don't like him or don't have respect for him. But the truth is that, like there was always a story about Honky Tonk talking about when Harley Race had some kind of abdominal surgery, or he had some complications. They had to take a bunch of his intestine out, and he was off the road suddenly, and everyone was we just heard about it in the dressing room, and Honky Tonk said some remark in the dressing room about, I guess he doesn't got any guts anymore. And Dynamite got up and walked over and just backhanded him, knocked him off the chair.
Wow.
And that's what like. Dynamite was the policeman in the dressing room.
Right.
He didn't let any bullshit or somebody come in with an attitude, or a guy that was a superstar. Like, they had to come in and had to earn their rights in the dressing room with the boys, the guys that were doing the work, and the guys. And he was a really good. That's what I mean. There was a lot of guys will tell you that's what. He was a bit of a bully, and he was a bit of a bully. Like I can think of other situations where it was over the line, but with Jock Rougeau, for example. But there was times that Dynamite, being a bully and being a bit of a policeman, would straighten out guys. Like that whole thing that happened years later with Shawn, with Shawn's personality back in the 90s. The truth is, if Dynamite Kid had been in the dressing room, none of that would ever happen.
Right. Interesting.
He would have policed that and straightened that out before it became an issue. The boys don't do that. The boys have their own locker room, to a certain degree than the talent. You had to always be one of the boys first.
Well, speaking of one of the boys, and bringing up Dynamite being the policeman of the locker room, I've heard so many stories about Andre the Giant, the boss. If he didn't want you in the dressing room, he would run your ass out. How was Andre back in the day? Was he the king of the dressing room? Because Tim White, referee Tim White, who's refereed so many of yours in my matches, if he didn't want you in there, he would grab your shit and throw it out the door, and you really didn't have much to say about it. How was Andre?
He was another one of those guys. They can talk about Andre, but I loved him. I understood him, and I sort of appreciate him, and he was the kind of guy that if you respected him and you worked hard, and then you were, like you said, you earned it. He was always a good guy, and Andre was a great worker too.
Absolutely.
Don't say that a lot about Andre, but he was a super coordinated guy. And I can remember it's in the new WWE DVD that they just did on me a few months ago, or a month ago. It was me and Andre wrestling in Italy, which makes me laugh even thinking about it, because I can remember going, who the hell put me with Andre? And I remember freaking out in the dressing room, going, I'm going to do a single match with Andre. And Andre kept kind of acting like he didn't give a shit, and I remember no one would give me a finish or anything. I said, what the hell are we going to do? And anyway, he finally started laughing and talking about, don't worry about it. And I found out later that it was Andre that asked that he could work with me. He said he wanted to say he wrestled Bret Hart one time. And so we booked this single match in Milan. But I will say this much, when he started to drop that elbow on me from that height,
yeah,
and looking up at that body, it's like a piano, like a grand piano getting ready to fall on top of you. And, a 7'4" grand piano.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, holy shit, he could kill me right now. If he's off by an inch or two or just slips or just, sneezes or something, I mean, I could die right now. And, he dropped that elbow drop on me. It was like somebody covering me with a blanket. It was so, he was such a pro. He really was. And I loved working with him. I had a lot of tags and situations with him, but he was always a pro and always, if he told you he was going to be there on the finish or, like whatever it was, he was there.
Right.
Whatever he needed to do, he did it. I don't remember Andre, and I also remember, it's funny that you remember these stories, but I remember my first day in WWF back then was with the Dynamite Kid. They flew us down for Brantford and Poughkeepsie TV tapings, one in Toronto and one in Poughkeepsie, or close to Toronto. But anyway, we went to Poughkeepsie and we landed at the airport in LaGuardia, and then we got some other little airline to White Plains to Poughkeepsie. And when we were in LaGuardia, I remember the Freebirds, all three of them. They were all passed out around the gate.
Oh no!
And they were so. I remember we left without them. The plane. They couldn't open the door of the plane for the pilot and everyone else to get on because they were all conked out against the door. And I remember they missed the plane. They never showed up. And I think actually it was a couple of days later that the same kind of thing happened, and they showed up in Providence, Rhode Island, and they showed up about an hour late into the show, and they came in giving some excuse about being late. They were, I think, clearly had been drinking and whatever else they'd been doing. And as soon as they walked in, Andre just said, "You're fired," to all three of them. All three of you guys are fired.
Andre said that?
He goes, "You're fired." And I remember Michael Hayes cutting a promo on him, going, "You can't fire me. You're not in charge," and all this stuff. And Andre, I just remember Andre goes, "You'll see tomorrow. It's either you're gone or I'm gone."
Oh, shit.
The next day, they were all fired.
Oh, shit.
He was one of the boys. He was tired of them coming late, and they were bullshit, and they were getting away with it, and he just said enough, And he was a professional. He didn't like guys that weren't, Bam Bam was another guy that, when he had some big gates, he got some matches with Hogan, I think, right off the bat. He just come in he was a brand new guy and young guy, and making huge money, working with Hogan on top. And he started bragging in the dressing room about what he made and how great he was and this and that. And he was talking out of his ass for about, for a couple of days. Andre made him sure he wrestled him in the garden. And Andre kicked him around like a soccer ball for about 30 minutes. I mean, it's brutal.
A soccer ball.
He manhandled Bam Bam, who was a fairly tough guy. But
absolutely.
Andre, when he got mad at you, you didn't want to be on the wrong side of Andre.
Well, I mean, there's nothing you can do with a human being like that big. And pre-back surgery, before, he really kind of started going downhill, I've heard stories of some of the stuff that he did in the ring, standing on a guy's hair and wrenching his arms up just because, it was kind of, torturing him a little bit, but just kind of, letting them know with no uncertain terms that he didn't really like that particular person, and there wasn't anything you could do about it. He was too big and powerful.
I couldn't imagine, like Andre. Well, it was a good thing that Andre was as good-natured as he was.
Did you ever drink with him?
All the time. It got to be kind of a normal thing. I think everybody drank with Andre, but the truth about Andre was that when he was at the bar, if you kept bothering him or something like that, he would ignore you. Like wrestling fans kept coming up and asking for his autograph or tapping him on the shoulder. He would never turn around. He would never look at him. He just completely and totally ignored them. And finally, they would lose it to the point they would cut promos on him. And he would still just ignore them. He just shut everybody out
And I realized that the poor guy never gets sent. People bother this guy everywhere he goes.
Right.
And I don't think they understood how hard it was to be Andre. And I always allowed him that. I wrote a funny story in my book about my brother Smith driving us to the airport in my car, funny enough. But I remember it was like we had to rush Andre to the airport. We had to get him there for a plane that was leaving like right away. And the plane was long missed when we were driving to the airport. But my brother Smith drove about, he drove about 120 miles an hour to the airport. And,
where was Andre?
At 5 o'clock traffic. And Andre was in the passenger seat.
What kind of car was it?
It was a big Cadillac.
Yeah.
Big 76 Brome d'Elegance. It was a big, heavy-duty Cadillac. I'm sorry, Andre was in the back seat. I was in the front seat. And my brother's driving my dad's Cadillac that he gave to me. And he drove it like an absolute idiot to the airport, like just through stop signs, red lights, side of the road, everything, in driving about 100 miles an hour. And he got to the airport and he ran in with Andre. And then I remember when we went to the airport, there was a big ramp. If you ever see the Calgary airport, there's a big sort of curved ramp as you're going up the airport to the next level. And we almost went over, I swear. My brother took that corner so fast with Andre. We were on two wheels. And I remember the car actually started hydroplane to go up in the air. And then we crashed, kind of came down, and we screeched to a halt in front of the American departure or whatever. And Andre got out of my car. He was so mad he slammed the doors. Just about, I never saw him so mad. He got out of the car. He was just steaming. And he went in to try to make this supposed flight that he knew was missed. And my brother came out about 10 minutes later. The police came out. I remember they were going to arrest me. And I remember I said, explain the whole thing. It was my brother Smith driving. And he was trying to drive Andre to get him on a flight. And I kind of talked the cop out of giving him a ticket. But Andre was so, and rightfully so, because I was right in the car. And I know how scary that ride was. And we really did almost go over that ramp. He wouldn't talk to my dad, and he wouldn't talk to my brother, any of my brothers, including Owen, forever again. He wouldn't talk to any of them. He started talking to me only after I sort of made friends with him.
So he didn't say thank you for the ride.
Yeah. But, in all fairness to Andre, I always understood it. I mean, shit, that was a scary ride. And he's got every right to be mad.
Hey, before you came on the show, I sent out on my Twitter account, Steve Austin BSR. You can follow me on Twitter at Steve Austin BSR, and you can follow Bret at Bret Hart on Twitter. And I sent out some information that you were going to be on the show, and if you had any questions, just send your emails. We're about to go to break, but before we go to break, let's answer a couple of these questions and then come back and go all to fan questions so that the people who participated in this show can get their question asked and answered by Bret Hart. What is your most cherished moment in the ring? And I know that's a tough one because there's a lot of special moments in your career.
It's hard. It is really hard to say, but I probably got to say maybe winning the title the first time.
Right.
I just think even though it wasn't the greatest match or wasn't the great, it wasn't anything that I, if I could have planned it, but at the same time, I think it was the most important. I mean, that was the big night. That was, if somebody could have told me that someday when I got into wrestling, I would reach that pinnacle, like really be the champion of the world, I would have, I think if I somehow could have known I was going to get that far, it seemed like such a far-off dream. When I really... You
never saw yourself being a heavyweight champion of the world?
No, not really. It was like that would be in my deep, farthest dreams. And that's kind of how I looked at it, too. It was like, geez,
but that was
the craziest dream that I ever had came true. I am the champion. I used to write wrestling magazines, draw the pictures. I had the belt on. I was the champion. I took on everybody. My little wrestling magazine was WWF. I fought my brother Owen in the wrestling magazine. It was really funny, all the stuff I drew when I was about 13 years old, and because I like to draw.
Yeah.
But I draw these magazines with myself and different brothers as champions, but Owen was the one bad brother, which was funny because he's the one that used to laugh about that because he used to read my magazines that I used to draw as a kid. And it's, all the stuff kind of ended up playing out for real, or at least for a while there.
But it was
I've lived a very, I know I went through a lot of stuff with Owen passing and Bulldog and a lot of sad tragedies in wrestling. But to be really honest, I'm very happy with what I got from wrestling. I got a lot of great memories, and I had a lot of great times. And I hope that anyone that does read my book appreciates that it's more about all the good stuff I did.
Yeah, one of the things also about your first. One of the other things about your when you first became champion there in WWF was it was a transition, because prior to you, it was a big man's game.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of saying earlier. Is I think that the wrestlers of today, they didn't grow up watching, Dusty Rhodes, and they didn't grow up watching Hulk Hogan, and they grew up watching Bret Hart, and that's why they wrestle. That's the way they wrestle today. And I think the generation that Vince referred to it in that thing last week on Raw, the Bret Hart night, but he mentioned it as sort of the Bret Hart era. But I do think that when I became champion, it wasn't about I didn't have 24-inch arms. I wasn't 6'8", and I didn't look like Warrior either, and I didn't look like, even Macho Man was kind of different. I was the first sort of mid-sized guy to get sort of really, maybe Randy too. I think me and Randy were the first ones to really start making it about the wrestling. And I don't think people remembered me necessarily at the time, because I got sort of stuck with the belt at a funny time in the business. Hogan had got questioned on steroids on the Arsenio Hall show, put him in a funny light, and steroids became a big thing. And Vince had his trial, and they thought he was selling steroids to the wrestlers, and there was sex things going on with the ring crew that became headlines, and the business was in a bad slump. Hogan sort of jumped out and left everyone, abandoned the wrestling because he was going to do Hollywood. And there was those saying, like, where's wrestling go from here without Hulk Hogan? And I think, to be really honest, I was the first real, this is the way wrestling's going to go without Hulk Hogan. It's going to go with Bret Hart, and we're going to go into wrestling. We're going to go completely the other direction.
And go it did. And the gears in the game of professional wrestling never stop, and it's always going to keep rolling. Doesn't matter what your name is, who you are, and that's what makes the business so interesting. The machine never stops. Sometimes the parts fall off, or sometimes the parts are replaced. I'm talking with Bret the Hitman Hart. The best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. When I come back, we're going to go to fan questions and talk a little bit more with the one and only Bret Hart.
Hi, I'm Jessie Prey.
And I'm Andy Cassette. Welcome to Love Murder, where we unravel the darkest tales of romance turned deadly.
Our episodes are long-form, narrative-driven, and deeply researched. Perfect for the true crime aficionados seeking stories beyond the headlines.
Like the chilling case of Blanche Taylor Moore, the so-called Black Widow who left a trail of poisoned lovers.
Or the shocking murders of Chad Shelton and Dwayne Johnson, where family ties masked a sinister plot.
Subscribe to Love Murder on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Welcome to the Steve Austin Show.
Yeah, that's right, everybody. Los Angeles, California, Steve Austin talking to the Hitman. And let me tell you something. If you're looking to buy something online and you want to support the Steve Austin Show, here's what you got to do. Go to PodcastOne.com and click on the Amazon banner on the Steve Austin Show page. Doing that gets you to the same Amazon place you normally go, but with the bonus. Amazon kicks back a small percentage of the sale to help support the show. That means more Steve and fewer ads to pay for doing this. All the prices are the same. They don't jack nothing up. You just support the Steve Austin Show. Thank you. And moving on. I was deep in conversation with the one and only Bret the Hitman Hart. A lot of you fans wrote in and asked questions. This entire last segment is going to be your questions read by me and answered by Bret. And we're going to start it off, Bret. Are you back with me here?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Well, let's start it off with this. All right, trim that out. Okay, Bret, during your time in Stampede Wrestling, who would you say was the most legitimately tough guy on the roster the whole time you were there? And that's from Patty over in Liverpool. Patty in Liverpool sent that.
Well, there were a lot of legitimately tough wrestlers all the time. I mean, being tough isn't something you just go through a period, like really tougher. But I think, my dad used to always say, a lot of guys felt that Haku was one of the toughest guys in the dressing room.
I've always heard the name Haku. Everybody that has been around says Haku. Are you confirming that?
I'm just saying that my dad used to always say, and I'll imitate him. He'd say, "I'd like to see the guy that's going to take Earthquake off his feet." And I think about it and I go, undefeated sumo wrestler, undefeated amateur wrestler, undefeated in every kind of type of wrestling you could think of. Not too many guys pushing Earthquake around. Yeah. Earthquake, pretty tough guy, huh? He was super tough, man. I think I don't have any doubt he would have been a gold medalist if he decided he wanted a gold medal. But he was undefeated Canadian heavyweight champion. No one even touched him. No one could beat him. He had, if you ever look at him, he was a big guy, big fat, like a heavy guy. But he was built like a mastodon, though. He was big boned and heavy. You look at his legs. Yeah, they're like tree trunks, man. They're like those ones in Oregon that are big redwoods. They're like huge. There's nobody pushing him anywhere. I don't even know if an elephant could push him too far. That'd have been a damn good WrestleMania match. Hey, we got another question. This is, let me see. This is coming from Con. Bret from Con in Oxford. Got a lot of people from England. Love the Hitman. They're writing in. People listen to the show all over the world. Bret, if you were in 100% top shape, who would you most like to get in the ring with and feud from today's WWE roster, and why? Well, the guy I would love to work with the most would be Cena. I would love to have wrestled him, and it could never happen. Just so everyone knows, but it could never happen. But ideally, he would have been a great, and Steve would appreciate this. The villain, the heel character that I sort of became in '97, that Bret Hart, the one that was bashing Canada and with the Canadian flag and had the attitude and all that same character against John Cena today would be a great, if you could morph them together, that would have been a great match. I think I would have really, I would have had some great psychology and great way to tell a story, and Cena was the great, perfect hero to go against, that Hitman character from that era. I would love to have done that. And in saying that, and it's sort of the same thing as what happened with me and you. When I think of when you and I worked, Steve, that was the beauty of it, that the wrestling was going through this change, and they started liking the badasses, and the guys like John Cena, they're starting to get tired of cheering for the same old sort of, the guy that's number one baby face of the company kind of thing. It's like, you know what, we're not buying this guy, and we're going to go against the grain. And it was a whole transition that's never been, I don't think anyone could understand how hard it was. You never sometimes knew what you were going to happen to go to certain towns. And no matter how bad you get, they cheer for you, and no matter how good you try to be, they boo you. And that whole period, and how we sort of switch places, and sort of, I always tell people, you want to understand great working and great psychology and two wrestlers appreciating the circumstances, that what's happening in the business around them, and how to sort of. I think it's a really. It was such a great time. I mean, I know we've talked a lot of times about that match, but I really think there was some great art being made that's never been. They'll never duplicate that art, the artistry that came from that time period. It was really, it's amazing, because I know that in Survivor Series when we fought, you and I, we tried so hard to make that the greatest match of all time. Like, we really gave our all for that. So when it was over, it was like that. We did everything. We did everything we could think of, every move, every bang, I thought we took it to the edge. And then all of a sudden, the way I remember when we got worked at WrestleMania 13, it was kind of last minute and kind of like, okay, well, we'll just slap Bret Hart and Steve Austin together again. They got kind of a building thing going, and it's like, yeah, but we just worked a month ago kind of thing. It's like, well, you're going to work again. And it's like, we're going to make it a no-holds-barred match. And, I remember at the time thinking no-holds-barred, that takes out pinfalls. So that makes it even more boring and more harder. We're not going to have the same, and I remember thinking of the match I had with Bob Backlund, the I Quit match, which I thought was my only really disaster match I ever had. But anyway, so I don't think anyone ever realized, I know I didn't, that, that would be such a great match. I think going into it, I thought it was going to be awful hard to come up and try to duplicate what we had already done before.
Well, when you're talking about that match and us going back together so soon, I just injured my knee. I was in San Antonio. I was off. It was about 2 or 3 weeks before WrestleMania 13, and I was at home watching Monday Night Raw when Vince made the announcement that in a submission match in the semi-main would be Stone Cold Steve Austin and Bret the Hitman Hart. I was watching TV. I am in the match. I just found out about it. The submission match totally pissed me off because, I didn't have a whole arsenal of offensive moves anyway, and I damn sure didn't have any submission moves, maybe one. So I was petrified and mortified and pissed off. Of course, I hadn't been in the company really long enough for them to consult me or ask if it was okay if they booked me in a match. But I was hotter than a sumbitch. And I don't want to talk too much about WrestleMania 13 or any of our matches because I want you to come back and I want to spend a total show on those because I want to discuss certain segments of time that people can go back and reference as we pick through those matches. But your answer about John Cena and working with him, I totally see that. But also, I love the heel aspect of Bret the Hitman Hart from way back in that 86 match with Ricky Steamboat. And I think Steamboat had actually requested to work with you. Was that true?
I don't know.
Do you remember the match I'm talking about, though?
The match that you're talking about was we got news that we were working at WrestleMania. And they booked us in Boston, and they booked us in Washington, D.C. to sort of get comfortable with each other, get familiar with each other. And so the match that you watched was the very first match we ever had. But that night in the dressing room before that match, they came in and said the match got scrubbed. They told me I was in the Battle Royal now, and that the Steamboat match was going to be Hercules and Steamboat, which in the end probably was better because Hercules ended up doing a match with him about 30 seconds long, which jobbed out to him, and that wasn't even worth the trouble. I would have hated doing that.
But if you
switched it.
But if you go back, anybody on YouTube to watch this match, that was 1986. Was that in Boston?
That was in Boston. The beauty of that match is that we never worked with each other before. And
that thing was a thing of beauty. It's seamless. It's so snug, and the timing is there. And that would have been Steamboat versus Bret Hart in Boston in 86. Catch that on YouTube. And you kind of brushed upon the next question sent in from Marcy, and here it is. And since you brought up my name, what was it that you saw in Steve Austin that you knew you wanted to work with him and give him the rub he needed?
Without going to a big, long, blowing a lot of smoke up your ass kind of thing. I mean, the truth is, I remember going to Vince when you were stunning Steve and going, why is this guy not here? Vince was going, we don't have any. Vince's office said we don't have anybody for you to work with. I go, why don't you get Steve Austin? Because I used to bring your name up a lot. And I used to bring up Benoit's name a lot, and there's certain guys in WCW that I used to bring up their names. Why don't you bring these guys in? They're free now. They're not working for them anymore. And Vince would always think about it, but you never see him bring them in. And all of a sudden, one day, there was Steve, and it was like, finally. I even told Steve that story when he first said, I've been asking him to bring you in for like 2 years now. And I was a big fan of Steve before he got to WWE, and and I always tell people that tell me, they go, you made Steve Austin and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, that's not true.
No, but you were a big part of the making process, and I'll never forget that. And you got to call a spade a spade. Would I have been okay without you, yeah, most likely, but that you can't take that, you just can't take that component out of my career. You were already the Hitman. You'd already established greatness, and you would continue to go down the road that you did. You were already a made guy. Feuding with you and you handpicking me for that match in Madison Square Garden. And I remember I told this story with Sean when he first came on the show back in the day, that we were in Houston. It was at the Houston Summit. I'd wrestled Sean in about a mid-card match, and you had watched the match. And I remember when you came up to me afterwards, and you said, "Hey, man, that was a good match." And you said, "I'll work with you any day." And so you were a big part of helping make me. And sometimes people don't understand the rub process. Certain things have to happen correctly during some time to get people over. Guys don't get over just because they're over. It's a whole process of going through the process. So working with you was, imperative for my career to end up the way it did. And with the feuds and the storylines, I mean, you couldn't have scripted a better story from really start to finish of the stuff that we did.
I just remember a lot of the, like the stuff, I think you used to sometimes say the odd comment about my dad. But old man Hardy down in his basement or whatever it is, you'd say something about him. It would light up my dad so much he'd get a big smile on his face. He would love it, and I was like, we had such good promos, considering we were two guys that really got along pretty good. But our promos, I think, whenever I watch them, I was really in my zone. Like we seemed to understand each other's characters perfectly, how to always make each other's characters and keep pushing, and I like, when I look back to those days and the promos I was doing with you, I think they were, and yours in particular, was like you were ahead of your time there. You were just getting your getting familiar with where you were going, and I always tell people, and this is true, that once I left WWE, I wasn't really a fan of wrestling so much. I tried not to watch the show and that. The only guy I watched was you. I always love all the stuff you did. Even with Vince, I'd shake my head and go, "Yeah, I love it. That's good shit." Damn. I was like the only character that to me that really went back to my childhood of what a wrestling villain. But I think there's even a couple of Bugs Bunny cartoons where they had a wrestler that would look a lot like what your gimmick was. The muscle. The look, the whole thing. You just, you were always, we always had a good chemistry together in the ring too. I do remember you working with Sean all over the place in Texas, in little towns, and I don't even remember the names of some of them, but I do remember kind of peeking over like barn doors and stuff like that to watch you work, and coming back and saying, "Yeah, I want to work with you sometime." And and then whenever we did work, I think we always where we worked well. I know. I think that what I did for you a lot of the time was, I think if it's fair to me to say, I think when you first got to WWE or when you first started working with me, you were still a little. You kind of you spit out of control sometimes. Like you get a little. You got going too fast. You end up somewhere you didn't know where you were in the match. And I think I was good at kind of teaching you to calm down, relax. It's not the whole match isn't screwed up. We'll just go back to this part. Now we'll pick it up again. And I think I really taught you how to pace yourself better and just take your time. And I noticed it years later. I was like, yeah, you can tell like how much you've improved. Like from the time period when you first worked with me in say Survivor Series, to even when you worked with me at WrestleMania 13. The timing and the understanding of how we worked, and really that was just two guys mostly playing off instincts of each other's characters, and it's like I love how we started it. I love how we duked it out all the way through. I always think that's what this whole business is about. Is what we did in that match is that's the greatest art of pro wrestling that I could think of.
But, you know, when I go back and watch stuff, and I'm just so hypercritical of anything that I see or do, and in picking apart the current product, I mean, you know, I don't mince words. It is what it is, and I'm just passionate about the business. I was watching part of that match last night. You had hit me in the corner. I was hanging from the turnbuckle with both arms. You spun me around, and that was when you started giving me those big haymakers, and I kicked you right in the balls, and you went down. I started using the ropes to pull myself up, and the match continued. But when I was watching that last night, I was thinking, golly, you could have stayed down another 30 seconds. 30 real seconds. I could have, is who I'm referring to. Then started pulling up those ropes. And we had that crowd right in the palm of our hands. But that was just the greatest natural double down that could have happened, and it was. And when I look back and nitpick it, I should have stayed down for 30 seconds. That's what I think.
You know, I always tell people, like, when I fought Bulldog in Wembley, and it was like, I remember going through the whole match with Davey, and it was a long story about the match, but I remember at the very end, I told Davey, I said, make sure you, when we get up at the end, I said, I'm not going to shake your hand. I'm going to make like I'm a poor sport. I'm going to keep making out I'm going to leave, but just keep giving me that, just keep staring at me like, come on, you're my brother-in-law.
Yeah.
You know, come on, I beat you fair and square, and I'm offering my hand. Just keep looking at me with the big puppy dog eyes, and I'll just keep getting like I'm going to leave, like fuck you kind of thing. And I told her, I said, we'll have that place. We can have that place. I'll have that 82,000 ready to start crying if we do it right. And you know what? I remember it's a little thing, but whenever I watch that match, I go, I couldn't get Davey to look me in the eye. And every time he did, he turned. He started trying to work the crowd.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, "You idiot! The drama's with me.
Right.
With me. Look at me. Don't look at the crowd. Don't look at Diana. Don't." And he kept. And I remember, you see me, I just finally throw my hands up and I just walk over and I hugged him because it was like he didn't get, he forgot.
Right.
Never did get it, and it was like one of those things that I can just tell you, when you watch that show back, as much great as that match is, it's the little details. And another thing that I do remember is when when you and I worked, that we always had good chemistry. You know, we always got along very good in the ring, and I don't think we ever didn't have good chemistry in the ring. Even on that DVD that just came out, they have me and you working in South Africa. And I don't know if you've seen that back in a while.
I haven't seen that. I remember that match. I thought it could have been better, but I remember one time, and I did enjoy that match in South Africa. I think I was a little blown up from the travel schedule, but one time we were working in Kuwait, and I think we worked a string of shows together there. And you and I were always, are you laughing? And you might know the story I'm about to tell. We're always dead serious in the ring. And for the first few years when I was in the business, I mean, I didn't think you could smile. I didn't think you were supposed to have fun. I just thought you were supposed to wrestle. And me in a competitive environment, man, I have killer instinct. I'm just out there to compete. Well, hello. Finally, I learned how to relax a little bit and to loosen up a little bit and have fun out there. And when you're having fun, the people are having a good time, and it doesn't matter how serious the angle is. It's just you being you and in the moment, whether you're heel or babyface. Doesn't mean you have to smile. You're just having fun. And so I was out there playing a little bit of Gaga that night, and I was trying to get. Who was the referee in that match? I said, I bet I can get Bret to crack. And that's when I started flapping my wings like a chicken. And you barely laughed, and you always used the back of your hand and your hair to cover up your smile. And I almost busted you. Do you remember that?
I do remember a match with me. I do sort of remember that. I remember maybe it was the same week or same day. I think it was a 3-day trip. So I remember Owen being in a match with, and maybe you were in it, maybe you weren't, but I remember whoever was in it with me, he was all hijinks, and he was pretending to smoke while he had guys in head scissors. And he was pulling all his shtick out, all his funny little gags where he's taking the funny bumps, and he'd call high spots that were impossible to do. I remember laughing on the apron so hard. I think the hardest I've ever laughed in the ring was in that match. And, it's not very often that you get a chance to, like you said, to laugh every now and then. But, I remember with Kurt Hennig, I always had a spot where he'd call some kind of a duck the elbow cross body, and then he'd kick out, and I'd roll under the rope, and we'd go into a big series of high spots after that. But I remember the first time we did it, I dived a little early, and he was a little too far back, and anyway, I ended up kind of hitting him around the shoelaces with a big cross body, and we both started laughing, and it was like, and I think the match turned out to be not one of our best matches anyway. So that was the very first time we worked, and we always laughed about doing that spot, so that every time we did work, we did it like that anyway. And we would always kick out. He'd kick out, and I'd be laughing my head off under the bottom rope, and I'd come up, and I'd hit him with a tackle, and I'd go through all these high spots where he's bumping and taking arm drags, and I'm coming up and hip tossing him, and it was a lot of complicated stuff, and I'm laughing all the way through it. So I took him over in the headlock, and I'm lying there panting in the ring, just catching my breath. And we'd both be just laughing our heads off. And, it was fun out there sometimes. It wasn't always what people think it is.
Hey, confirm this story for me. We're going to wrap this thing up after this story. I always heard a story, I think it was before I came in a company, and everybody knew, and we'll cover this in more detail next time you're on the show, but Owen used to pull ribs on everybody, and he kept the whole crew laughing, whether you were in the ring, and he could also have a great match in the ring. But when it was time for a little bit of ha-ha, he was that guy. And through the airports, on the road, everybody laughed with Owen. But one time, I guess it was like a battle royal situation. You guys are overseas. I want to say it was India, and somehow Owen snuck a bunch of tuna fish into the ring, and while you were on the mat, stuck the tuna fish in your mouth and had you in a camel clutch. Is that a true story?
Yeah, I think that is a true story.
What happened?
I can't remember. I think it was a little more subtle than that. I can't remember, but it doesn't. For some reason, I'm thinking it was true.
Well, okay, so what was the best rib Owen played that you saw?
Well, I think the best one was the one with, for me anyway, was the one with my dad and Reg Park.
What happened? Reg Park used to wrestle. He was one of the first guys to make championship wrestling belts. Give a little history on Reg Park.
Yeah, years and really nice ones.
Yes,
really nice.
He was a standard.
He was a bodybuilder. He had a really good body. He had a really good physique and was a fairly respected bodybuilder before he got into wrestling, and always took good care of his body. Always was a good athlete and stuff like that. Pretty mild, kind of timid guy, but not a shooter or anything like that. And Owen could disguise his voice just because if you met Reg, and Owen only met him a couple of times, they went through Phoenix and stuff like that. He used to live in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Stu knew him and loved him, and every once in a while he'd come up and visit Calgary because Phoenix is kind of Calgary are sort of twins or whatever, and they. Reg would come up all the time and say hi at different times of the year and, passing through. And so we kind of knew him, a little bit, knew that he worked for my dad and knew who he was. And I remember WrestleMania 4, I think, in New Jersey or something. I brought my dad down, and he was in a big suite with me and one of my kids in a room, and he had a big long nightshirt on. He was having a great time. He was with his first WrestleMania, and he was meeting different guys and wrestlers, and Owen decided to call him. It was first thing in the morning, and we were just getting up and having breakfast and stuff like that, and my dad's in his nightshirt. And Owen decides that he's going to call my dad up from the lobby of the hotel and pretend he's Reg Park, and he calls up, and I answered the phone because it was my room, and he fooled me. I said, "Who is this?" And he goes, "It's Reg Park. Can we talk to your father?" or something like that. And he disguised. He did sound just like Reg Park. Yeah. I handed the phone to my dad. I go, "It's Reg Park." And my dad gets on. It's like "How the hell are you, Reg?" And Reg, how you? They're laughing, and Owen's kind of playing along with it, and they're having a couple of good chatting away just like the real Reg would. And then all of a sudden, Owen just turns on my dad and goes, "Stu, you never had the balls to try me," or something. That was what it was. You never had the balls to try me. And he kept saying it to Stu and calling Stu out on the phone and calling him that he wanted Stu to fight him in the lobby of the hotel. I just remember seeing my dad's face while he was holding the phone. First it was like, how the hell are you, Reg, and all that. And a minute later, Reg, if you'd wanted to try me, why didn't you try me? And I remember he got so worked up. I remember Owen kept taking it further and further and further until it got hysterical and he couldn't take it anymore. And my dad kept getting more and more wound up until I was actually like thinking I might have to step in and take the phone from him. And all of a sudden, my dad, I remember he slammed the phone down and sat on the bed in his nightshirt. I remember he was just shaking his head, and he looked at me. He goes, "That lousy Owen, he got me." Because Owen finally just said, "It's me, Owen. I'm pulling your leg." And it was, it really was the funniest I think that he ever did. He got my dad big time.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh,
man. It makes me laugh thinking about it.
I know. That guy, he made a lot of people laugh. I tell you, going through the airports, sometimes we were dead dog tired, and he'd pull a rabbit out of his hat and do something, and everybody would start laughing. But, all right, spent an hour and a half talking to Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret, will you come back and join me on a future edition of the show, because we've got so much more to talk about. I want to go into specifics about several of the pay-per-view matches we had. We touched on them briefly, teased a little bit, but break them down in details and nitpick them.
Steve, I'd love to come back. It'll be great to chat. We hardly even got started. It seems like we talked for about 15 minutes.
You're damn right. You heard it right there, folks. Bret the Hitman Hart coming back. You can follow him on Twitter, @Bret Hart. Check his website out. BretHart.com. For Bret Hart, the best there is, was, ever will be, I'm Steve Austin. I'm going to get my sorry ass in traffic and haul ass. I'll catch your ass down the road.
This has been a PodcastOne production. Download new episodes of The Steve Austin Show every Tuesday at PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.
Just when you thought summer couldn't get any hotter, Pluto TV is turning up the heat with thousands of free movies. Presenting Summer of Cinema. Stream your favorite blockbuster films like Gladiator.
I will have my vengeance.
Good Burger.
This is what I call fast food.
Beverly Hills Cop. The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. And Julie and Julia.
Bon appetit.
All for free on your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.